Welcome back to the Your Golf Performance Podcast. We're joined with Preston Combs. He is regarded as one of the best putting coaches in the world. Preston, welcome to the show.
Brent, thank you for having me.
I'm really ready to pick your brain today and see how much info we can get out of you for the listeners. Do you just want to just give us a quick sort of run through on your background and how you got into golf?
Definitely. Gosh, I've been playing since I was 6 months old with a spatula and a plastic ball, and that turned into junior golf and collegiate golf for a little bit. And when you try to turn professional and you realize that all of your friends are asking you for putting advice, you take a hint and realize you should probably be doing some work coaching as opposed to donating to the purse week in and week out. So that said, it was a pretty good message for me. And I was always a good putter too. When you don't hit it far or hit it super well, you become a good putter out of necessity. But I never wanted to be the failed player that showed everybody what I did, because ultimately what I did had some shortcomings, and I would much rather prefer it be technically sound and know enough to be able to help everybody, not just teach people how I did things. And that led to me learning aim point green reading when it was still the charts back in 2011. Then a few months thereafter, I bought my own Sam Putt Lab because I thought, well, if I can show somebody how to hit it to a certain spot, we'll use the Sam Putt Lab to show them how to hit it there more often. And I'll never forget my first night with the Putt Lab turned on. And by the time I was done doing some testing and some reading of the manual, we started about 8 o'clock at night and the sun was coming up the next morning. So
Yeah, wow.
I think I knew at that point I had found something that I was certainly wanted to take a deep dive into, but was always passionate about, because over the years that I continued to spend time with David Orr at Flat Stick Academy and some other individuals like John Graham, Mark Sweeney, and learning from them showed me over time where the holes were in my own putting. The questions that I always wondered about, why I needed to practice a lot in order to continue to perform well, why I might have struggled adapting from faster greens to slower greens, and to really have answers for those questions that I know if I was asking them of myself, other players have to be asking that of themselves, and especially the ones that are trying to compete for a living. I think I owe them a better answer than here's how I did it or here's what I think. And having that ability to definitively answer something, to say, well, I know for sure if we go down this road, we can find that extra quarter shot around. That certainly is something that appeals to me.
So when you got the putt lab and you did the aim point, was there ever an inkling in the back of your mind like, hey, I want to give playing another shot? Did you ever think like I've got a lot more answers now than what I had, when you were a junior, for example?
I think it was nice to know why I ran into certain problems that I did. I did a very good job hiding those problems, but when they were exposed, it was certainly an issue. The second, though, that you think you have all the answers is the second you find out that there's more to learn. And I think that's always been something that I've kept at the forefront. And even 10 years into putting coaching now, gosh, are we 10 years? We're at least 10 years here and full time for the last 7. And when you start looking at that and your opportunities to continue to provide answers for players, you start expanding, branching out different technologies, different thought processes, different approaches, and continuing to further that ability to adapt to different patterns and the people standing in front of you.
So for the coaches that tune in regularly, let's talk about education. So obviously it's one thing to just, purchase a Sam Putt Lab and do the aim point. What Obviously you've got a fair few mentors that you've sort of rattled off a few names already, but can you talk us through the process of so you started with aim point, you obviously moved on to David Orr, like what do you feel like you got most of your knowledge from and sort of helped you become a better coach with it?
Green reading from Mark Sweeney, and first learning aim point for my own game. And then a couple of years later, pursuing the certification for it. And aim point from the chart has since evolved into Express and a better way to communicate with all players. David Orr for the mechanics. I mean, his Flat Stick Academy is pretty exceptional for the information that it offers people, and the opportunity to learn from somebody that's been worked with world number ones, has been that far inside the ropes and deep in the mechanics, is certainly a real privilege. and really great of him to share his experiences and his knowledge. And then from gosh, it, then you start looking at other newer technologies that are out there, things that are starting to become a little bit more mainstream, like a quintic ball roll. And Dr.
Yeah,
Paul Hurry, and I mean, talk about a gentleman that's published papers about putting, and to have real material as opposed to just a blog post of here's what I think or
yeah,
here's my opinion on something, to actually do the research and conduct it for something that is so fine a pattern, such as how does a ball launch, how does a ball roll. Certainly great to learn from him, have that education, and be able to see what new technologies are coming out there too, whether it be things like Capto for a great walkabout unit to get feedback for in a real world setting for how's the putter moving and being able to collect data in that environment. Have to mention the team at Zen Green Stage for the work they've done to provide the one of the best moving floors, and if not the best in the entire world. And the opportunity for me in my garage to create a viable environment to work on and learn putting. You know, you can't come to my studio for 3 hours and just hit flat putts and work on a stroke. There's a whole element of the game that's missing, and being able to tilt the surface has certainly given me that opportunity to help players create that dynamic environment in a really great setting, including compound breaks, uphill, downhill, even double breakers. And being able to do that indoors and seeing the look on people's faces when that changes is pretty exceptional.
Do you want to talk us through the studio? Like, what do you got inside that garage? We were talking a little bit about it off air, but let's fill the listeners in.
Yeah, running a 16 foot by 8 foot Zen Green Stage. That's their medium size, fully articulating surface. So, like I mentioned, compound breaks. I want a little bit of break at the beginning and flattening out at the end, or vice versa, or double breakers. Just all of being able to offer players the opportunity to train in that environment
It's
has certainly
amazing, really.
changed. It really is. We were mentioning earlier, Brent, like 20 years ago, that wasn't a thought for people. But now here we are with a viable piece of technology to allow us to create that environment. The right now, and as I mentioned, I own a Sam Putt Lab. I've recently added Capto to my offering for players, so those that are coming in might see that pop up a little bit more often for its versatility and ease of use that it offers, especially on the putter fitting front. I'm going to be adding the Quintic overhead ball tracker. Not sure if you've hopped on their Instagram page recently, but their overhead ball tracking is certainly exceptional. Being able to help players craft that picture of how and why a ball breaks and create their own model of how this left to righter works for them and best
Yeah.
for them in their pattern, as opposed to being forced into an ideal putt.
So, using all the technology, what are the sort of key elements that you're, looking for, measuring, to try to help your students?
Well, for anybody that's hopped on the website and downloaded the free ebook, Three Things to Know, those three things are the putting priorities of read, speed, and direction. And ultimately, if players are working on their putting, we need to be furthering one of those areas. I think so many times I see players head to the green and the work on their putting is throw down their template, their chalk line, their gait, and just work on their stroke. And unfortunately, that's happening in isolation or completely separate from the awareness that I need to couple speed with this. And then I need to pick a read, I need to select a target, I need to point that stroke somewhere. And when there's that big a disconnect, I think that is the gap in performance that some players are running into. We'll talk about for coaches about block practice versus random practice. Well, what about the several steps in between those?
Yeah,
There's no sense in me going to the green and repping out 100 putts on my template and then headed to the course. Like there needs to be some framework. Well, if I'm going to work on the template here, there needs to be some accountability for how big or small and fast or slow the stroke's moving in order to say that this stroke that tracked on this template so nicely actually has some sort of relevance here.
yeah.
If I'm using the poor tempo, I don't necessarily know that's going to transfer well, even though it might look good on camera.
And that cause a lot of speed issues as well.
I think if working on your stroke without an awareness of the size and tempo
Yeah,
component can certainly cause problems. We get so in love with the making the perfect stroke that we forget, hey, it has to go 15 feet at some point.
yeah.
So
I
it
think
turns into
that's
tracing lines more so than putting, and that
yeah.
becomes an issue.
So. when you're videoing, and if I'm asking too many questions around how you do or conduct your lessons, just let me know. But there's going to be some coaches that would, I reckon, listen to this and then probably reach out to you to try to ask for some mentoring or something like that. But like when you're videoing a client, are you looking for certain angles or setup positions?
Tough to say certain because everybody's built differently. Everybody's
Yeah,
going to have different needs with their movement pattern. I mean, if you know what to look for in the face on and down the line, that's certainly a couple of good starting points here. I will say that creatively using your iPhone has certainly opened up some doors, and apologies to my Android users out there, but being able to take a screenshot and overlay the ruler from the photo edit feature to check ball position and shaft lean. I mean, if you dig back on the Instagram page, way back in How to Hack Your iPhone, a series that I put out there is really that's a great way to check some of the essentials, right? So if you're a coach listening to this and hey, somebody says that looks like that ball position is pretty center, but you're very certain it's back, there's your opportunity to concretely show, well, where is the ball position? Being able to look at things like that from a relevant perspective as opposed to just looking and guessing.
I actually am just sitting here realizing that I need to get over to your garage and just hang out for a day and just watch you. I'm mesmerized, and we're about 10 minutes in. Um, what are the sort of most sort of critical things that you look for in a putting stroke? I mean, obviously, they need to be able to deliver it back to get the ball rolling on their intended line, right? But if you had a if you were looking at Putt Lab and there's sort of the one thing that you just always turn your eye to, what would it be?
I can't even say that it's a specific putt lab number.
Yeah, okay.
Here's why. There's this trend, and I see it all the time on social media, on the stories, where people will post the before and after of the data, and before the numbers were yellow or red, and then the after data it's always green.
Yeah.
But green data doesn't mean it was a good putt. Green data doesn't mean it was a quality stroke or quality pattern. It just means that at the singular points in time where this data is being reported from, it matches up with a model that a computer says, hey, here was the best.
Yeah.
So you run into some issues where people are using funky patterns. Maybe they'll under rock or under twist or slightly close the face during the backswing, but then they'll have a very flat shoulder turn. And when you couple those two things together, you could get a very pretty looking face rotation number during the backswing. Face opens between 5 and 7 degrees. Computer likes that. But by the time they get to impact, because the face is shut relative to the path, because they had that under twist, and then they start opening up that flat torso turn during the follow through,
Yeah.
all of a sudden everything's hit a degree left. Face is always closed. It's closed. It's closed. And you can't figure out why. And it's like, well, it's not over rotating during the backswing. Oh, well, hold it off more. Right? It's like now you get to a point where you go, I might not end up with the right solution. And meanwhile, the problem was staring at you on camera. But if you don't know what to look for and you're just going off the data doesn't suggest there's an issue. So it's scenarios like that where if you say, hey, what is the one thing I'm looking for? Well, it's got to be the functionality of the movement pattern. And functional can be different for everybody. I've got a couple of very odd patterns, you might call them, things that you wouldn't necessarily teach, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad.
Yeah.
The player is able to manage the functionality of that pattern. It's providing the face correctly and the loft correctly at impact. They're able to repeat it, but it's also adaptable. They can also perform under different conditions. The pattern is usable on left to right and right to left versus some patterns, like let's say our prior example of the player has that face that gets a little shut going back with that flat turn. That might be your right-handed golfer that actually struggles on right to left putts because that has some pull bias built in there.
Correct. Correct. Well, one of my next questions was, how different can the numbers look from, your dead straight 10 footer that you might measure versus now that, you've got your platform there where you can do right to left and left to right. My question was, inside on a flat putt versus outside on a green where it's, 10 footer right to left, 10 footer left to right. Like, how different can the stroke mechanics vary in some golfers?
Assuming a good player, they're not going to vary a ton, but we have to keep this in mind. If you talk about changing slope, If you were to look at your TrackMan numbers on flat level 7 irons on a driving range, and then put that same golfer on in a real world environment with the ball above their feet or below their feet,
Yeah,
their TrackMan numbers are going to be a little bit different, but they're probably relatable. It's in the same family. If
yeah,
somebody's very square with the very neutral with the face path relationship on flat putts, I would expect something close to that on right to lefters, and same on left to righters. But if on the left to righters, I all of a sudden see the faces living a degree and a half open relative to the path, I might look at that and kind of wrinkle an eyebrow, because that's fairly different from a square face to path relationship in the other two scenarios.
yeah,
What is it about how the players read the putt or their anticipation of the break or curvature that's causing them to look at this and go and feel like they need to do something differently? Or maybe they're unintentionally doing something differently, and maybe it's not even bothering their start line. Maybe it's just a path is shifting a little bit more left on these left to righters. Okay, well, how does that impact my speed, my roll quality, things? Then they go, my left to righters, they seem to come up a little shorter. They're always dying in there. And I'm a good green reader, so I know it's not my target selection, right? It's questions like that that you need to, that players, when you start taking the deeper dive for the play, for the, I would say the scratch golfers and better that are listening to this, you have to start looking at the individual scenarios. It's not just, hey, I'm a bad putter from 8 feet. It's like, hey, there's something wrong from 8 feet on left to right specifically.
I like that. What about can we talk about the importance of a good routine? Is that something that you try to install into your students?
Well, it's information gathering. Every single shot, I'm faced with nothing really that different from an approach shot into a par four. I need to figure out how far away the target is. I need to figure out what club I need to get there. And albeit on the putting green, I'm not switching clubs, but I'm probably changing
Yeah, I
something
get
about
it.
my stroke size or tempo. I need to pick a target, and that's going to be your green reading component. And then the process and execution is going to be, well, I've taken that information. Now, what do I do with it? And how do I best prepare myself to execute that? So I think there are a lot more similarities to full swing than players give putting credit for.
Yeah,
We still have a stick, we still have a ball, we're still trying to create a given ball speed and a given launch direction. And when you start drawing those parallels for players, when you start helping them realize that there are things that they do for the other 38 shots around, 38? Yeah, hopefully 38 shots around. Putting guy had to think about that one. For those other 38 shots, they're gathering that same information, and the putting green's not that different.
I like that answer. Can we talk about improving speed control? I have a lot of people that will say to me, I need a putting lesson. And, the first thing that I might do is watch them hit some long distance putts. And it's just absolutely horrific. Um, you know, 6 feet short, 6 feet past. Yeah. Have you got anything you could help the listeners with around their speed?
Brent, I'm going to flip the tables on you, actually. I'm going to ask you a question.
All right. I
If
better listen.
you had somebody that came to you for a full short game lesson, and then in the last 10 minutes said, hey, could you look at my swing? Would you just take them right out to the range and have them start hitting 4 irons or 3 woods?
No.
I think then when we start looking at putting, we immediately jump in there to the lag putts, so 30 footers. Let's see what happens. And it's almost unfair, because I'd like to warm up with a wedge or two
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
before and work my way up through the bag before I got to those. But if the player's struggling with the wedge, you probably would stop there. You wouldn't have them continue to hit those shots and say, okay, well, I really want to see you hit a 4 iron.
Yeah.
Hey, let's start with something. Let's say, hey, here's a basic 10 footer. Hey, hit a few to this cup for me. Let's see what they look like.
Yep.
And you're probably not going to get a situation where that you're able to you're probably not going to get a situation where you're able to give everything somebody needs in that 10 minutes at the end of a lesson,
Yep.
but you can at least show them where the problem is. And you can show them, hey, the way you deliver the ball to the cup here, speed wise, you've got one that stopped 4 inches short, you've got one that went 3 feet by, and that's too big a dispersion, too big a window to say you're consistent. You would two putt in both of those scenarios in theory, but let's say add some tilt to that surface. Now all of a sudden there's
Yeah.
no physical way to pick a target because I don't know what is coming out the gun. Am I going to get dying speed or am I going to get crashing speed at 3 feet
Yeah.
by? So now all of a sudden, then it's just a non-issue. It's a non-starter. It's like, well, your speed's no good at 10 feet. We need to fix that first. So that gives players the opportunity to say, hey, if I really had my speed down at 10 feet, I could shrink my dispersion, which, by the way, is no different than everything you try to do on the range with a TrackMan or a quad during a full swing lesson.
Yep.
Shrink my dispersion, be more consistent, more predictable, and improve how the ball gets there. Start with that component. If you can start with that, then the doors open up. Now, all of a sudden, I can at least predict a read and say, instead of it saying, I think it's a cup out because I live at 3 feet by, and then occasionally I hit one that's dying speed and it misses painfully low. At least we have a better starting point here. Give them the opportunity. Coaches out there listening to this, because I know everybody's gotten the whole, can you look at my putting in the last 10 minutes of a lesson? At least put them on the pathway, at least show them, give them an opportunity to see, here's where your speed is from just a basic distance, close in, a makeable range like 10 feet. And from there, hey, I think we could work on the following pieces in order to improve your consistency. So whether it be the size or tempo through my base stroke system or whatever drills you might have in your arsenal to create that consistency. At least that gets them on the pathway with a functional skill that has other back end benefits.
Yeah. Now, I was going through your website the last few days, and you have a few products on there that are free for people to sort of go and download. Did you just want to, while we're on that topic, do you just want to have a quick little plug of your your website?
Oh gosh, the shameless self promotion plug.
That's what we're
No,
doing it for.
yeah, I think that's the putting plan and the free download of that. I think it goes into a bit more detail on that size and tempo discussion, and asking people with very specific protocols to go to a ghost hole or a cup plug out there, hit a series of putts to a target, and track your feedback. What is the dispersion that we're getting from this particular distance? Then let's be able to score that performance level. And then we can look at that performance level and decide, hey, this is the level that you're performing at now, and start asking questions. Is it functional? Can I build off of that pattern? And if I'm struggling at that distance, things like the base stroke system in the full course really outlines for players very tangible and practical strategies that don't require attaching a device to the putter or pulling out a metronome or pulling out your phone to be able to manage my size and my tempo and create some consistency.
So for anyone that's listening, the website's prestonsputting.com, and I will put that in the show notes just to make sure that you can head over to his website and sign up. Um, what about the difference between the best putters in the world versus the good players? So I'm talking like, you've obviously had your fair share of high-end elite tour players or, amateurs. The ones that seem to be able to just putt pretty good in events versus the ones that always, Preston, you know what, I feel like I'm stroking it good and I just can't seem to hole anything. Like, is there any commonalities or like differences that you see that could cause it?
Yeah, there is. I think part of it is the adaptability for players as they move from course to course. So I'd say it's more among my collegiate players, the good ones, the mini tour players that don't get the luxury of playing on stimp 11 and a half every week.
Yeah.
Right? It's the how quickly can I adapt to that new environment? And if you don't have a systematic approach for figuring out how far the putter goes, well, anybody that's listening should ask themselves, how far does your 8 iron go? And they have a tangible answer. How far does your pitching wedge go? How far does your 5 iron go? How far does your putter go? And all of a sudden, as soon as I say, how far does your putter go? Well, it's as far as I need to. I feel it out.
Yeah.
It seems really arbitrary and open ended when we have so much technology and so many other great ways to answer the first three questions for 5 iron, 8 iron, and pitching wedge. And they get to the putting green, it's just look at it and feel it. And it's kind of interesting when you ask that same player, let's say in a private lesson setting, I'll ask them that question and follow it up with, okay, so if that's the case, then if I took your rangefinder away, how would you feel about going to play the course right now? And they go, oh, well, I'd have to use sprinkler heads. Say, oh no, I'm going to cover the sprinkler heads too. You just got to use your eye. You just have to feel it out. And they go, well, that'd be a disaster. I would never do that. And then all of a sudden it kind of dawns on them that their strategy and their approach is the exact same on the putting green, and think we just need a little bit more investment. And I'm not saying pace off every single putt, but at least we need a little bit of framework to get us in the ballpark of about what club do I need to pick for a
Is
certain
that
distance.
is that a thing where you're talking about like length of stroke would equal distance that the putt should go on a set speed of green?
I think it's a really functional way for players to adapt to different greens.
Yeah,
And
okay.
it's the size and tempo relationship, those two key concepts that we dive into in the putting plan, that really open some doors for a lot of players. Because as soon as they look at it, they go, oh my gosh, that makes tons of sense. And then you start realizing how different the same stroke can be across different green speeds. And that's when you go, okay, I feel like now if I went to any golf course in the world, I feel like I can be best prepped to go play.
It's amazing. What about on the flip side, common mistakes that the high handicap golfers make with their putting? I mean, probably what you just spoke about there is it runs through, right? But is there anything
That might
else?
be an across the board thing for everybody.
Or is it what about like my dad that just aims straight and just lets his path dictate the start line?
I think your high handicappers, they would benefit from, yes, listen, everybody can benefit from better speed. No doubt about
Yeah.
it. I think at the at the amateur level, an appreciation for slope and how slope and stimp affect a read of a putt, and all of a sudden realizing that there aren't that many putts that need to be played inside the hole, heck, within a cup of the hole. There aren't, relative to the expanse of a green, there are not many putts where I'm aiming within one cup either side of the hole. You start looking at that and you go, I feel like a lot of those, their conventional wisdom is, yeah, cup out.
Yeah.
Inside right, keep the speed up.
Yeah.
And it's things like that that do more harm than good. And for those that actually are listening to this, they probably care to get better in some capacity. Go find an Aim Point certified coach, or if nothing else, follow Aim Point Golf on Instagram and pick up a couple of nuggets about things like slope and speed and some awarenesses. I certainly do not teach Aim Point in the putting plan, but I do think there's an opportunity in the putting plan to highlight some awarenesses of things that you might think are happening on a green, when the reality is, that's not what's actually happening. If you had just those awarenesses and maybe a couple of pictures of what a putt actually wants to do on a certain slope and a certain speed, it can open some doors for you just from creating awareness. Because most players would go, I didn't know it was supposed to look like that.
Yeah. It's one of my next questions was, what are the key steps you recommend for effectively reading greens? Now, I had Mark Sweeney on here about 40 episodes ago, and it blew my mind. I need to learn aim point. I haven't done it. I've sort of been, briefed on it. One of my former assistant pros, he knew how to do it, and um, I've spoken to a few other coaches. One of them said they couldn't actually feel the slope with their feet, which Mark debunked on the thing. He said they just didn't know how to actually feel it with their feet. Like they just hadn't been shown properly how to do it. So have you ever had that where people just can't seem to correlate the feeling with their feet versus the percentage of slope?
Yes, but there are some strategies to work around that. Uh, and I really regret in this moment not being able to remember the exact name of the disease. It's something where you lose a feeling in the bottom of your feet. And so there's no sensation for some players. I'll think of it before the episode's over. If not, you can throw it in the show notes, I guess. But I have had players that say it's especially amateur side putting schools, older people that say I can't feel it. Well, then you have to know, what are my other strategies, right? You have to be able to use your body in some capacity. I think that's where some people have prematurely knocked aim point, because they go, oh, well, you
Yeah.
have to use your feet. Well, I can't feel it in my feet. And so they go, I'm out, I'm done. But just consider, what are your opportunities to use your body differently?
He was interesting. Like, I asked the question around reading greens, and he's like, if you don't have a system like this, you can't read greens. Like you're guessing. And he was awesome to chat with, and I really want to get him down here to Australia. But if I don't, what about we get you down here to do some putting schools around Australia?
Oh, I've been eyeing a trip to Sydney and exploring your part of the world for, I don't know, maybe the last 10 years. I
Well,
love traveling. I love seeing different parts of the world. So if you're extending an invite, don't
I
threaten me
think
with a good time.
I think we need to chat about that off air and make it happen. There'd be plenty of people down here that would even the coaches. You know what I mean? We could maybe set up a coach training day and then do some stuff for the club level golfers and that. So, um, question around like you have a junior that comes to you, 14, 15-year old, wants to be a pro, full support by mum and dad. What are you trying to put into their mind to make sure that they can become the best putter that they should be to make it?
This one's always personal for me because I feel like I was the 15 or 16-year-old that said I want to play D1 collegiate golf and didn't get realistic answers and information to at least have a fighting chance to pursue it at that level. Right? Economics of this game notwithstanding, it was just a matter of, hey, everybody was enamored that I hit it 255, but I hit 14 of 14 fairways and I could hit the 150 sign with 7-iron 3 times in a row.
Yeah.
But at some point, the ball needs to go a little further than that, and there wasn't enough of an emphasis on that. There wasn't somebody that had the wherewithal to take me out to the tips at a course that was 7,300 yards and let me get my lunch handed to me, and just to prove a point. Because it was always my short game would always bail me out. I could at least scrap it around and get a good number. So I think it's that information, having access to information and being put on the right pathway. So for the 14-year-old that comes into the garage and he's with mom and says, "Hey, I'm pretty okay high school player, but I want to be able to go play at Florida." Okay, well, I've worked with a couple players on the Florida team, so already I know what it takes to be at that level. I know what it takes to perform in area junior tournaments, national junior tournaments. And that starts with today, we need to establish the framework for the skillfulness with the tool. Yes, we'll work on mechanics to help you do those skills better. And for anybody that's out there that's a coach, that is it a technique? Is it a skills based game? It's like Monopoly. I need to build the houses equally. I can't dump a hotel on Boardwalk and nothing on Park Place. I need to put one house on each, two houses on each, three houses on each. And then from there, it's like I look at that the same way. My skills bucket and my technique bucket need to grow together. Can't solely focus on just skills, but I think skills might be a viable starting point. It's always supplemented with here's the technique to do those skills better. And then there's the conversation of if you like how today went and you want to continue down this path, there's more. Kind of leave them with here's what the next step would look like. Here's what training in the interim would look like. And once you have somebody on that pathway, well, I feel like I can deliver somebody from that pathway of junior golf to the tour level should they stay with it that long, should their ball striking improve at the same rate.
What about um, like the belief inside the brain? If someone just keeps continually telling themselves that they're a bad putter, which was me as a kid, and still to this day, even though I put myself on Putt Lab and my numbers are okay. um,
You're a prime candidate for those green numbers getting lit up.
yeah.
I didn't realize we were talking about you 15 minutes ago.
Yeah. What do you think? I'm not even going to release this to the public. This is just for me to improve my own putting. No. What is that something that you have to deal with that person that's just negatively always talking about their stroke negatively, even though you might look at it and go, well, it's actually pretty good.
Yeah, but then you have to figure there's a why that the person is in that mental state, in that rut of, I'm no good at this. And you can't just sit there and tell them well, your stroke's good. We still have to figure out why. And so is it bad green numbers? Are the numbers lying to you in some capacity? Is it a lack of skillfulness or adaptability? Like there has to be more than that. And I have the luxury of being a specialist where if somebody's coming to see me for their putting, it's probably because they want to be there in some capacity.
Yeah.
They've traveled to come see me. So I owe them a little better answer. And it's like, well, everything's fine. Like they're there for a reason and you have to dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
And listen, I can't say that, okay, like the yips would be a great example here. Somebody says, oh, I've got the yips. I miss a bunch of putts inside of 5 feet. And say, okay, do you actually have the yips or do you just stink at short putts?
Yeah.
Let's ask that question first.
Yeah.
And let's address the technique and check all the boxes and make sure that the technique is sufficient and the strategies are sufficient before we label this a Y word scenario.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. What
So
about the?
it's
Sorry.
that.
Keep going. Keep going.
No, it's that piece that really can shift the way somebody is looking at their putting. And some battles take longer. I had a collegiate player at UCSB when I was out in Santa Barbara, California, and you know he was just kept telling himself he was a bad putter. I was like, "Where's this come from?" Well, coach says I'm a bad putter. Well, that's not helpful here. Let's figure out why. And it's like, well, your movement pattern kind of stinks. You're trying to do stuff with a putter. You're trying to move it straight back, straight through, and keep the face pretty square because you struggle hitting it online. And that is ultimately making the problem worse. Hey, let's fix that.
Yeah.
And 12 months later, to get a text from that player saying, hey, I never thought putting would be a strength of my game
Wow.
is
That's
kind of
amazing.
cool. But he was in such a negative mindset because he didn't have any really good reason to believe that he was a good putter or even capable of being a good putter because no one showed him he could.
Yeah. Okay.
So you have to start there with the why in order to really address, hey, is the problem in fact in my head?
Yeah. What about putter fitting? Do you dive into that much?
Well, you have to.
Yeah. Yeah. I
It's
just didn't want to ask the question, and you go, actually, I don't do that. So,
well, it's a part of the process, right? I
mm,
mean, when you have the right stick is certainly helpful. You know, I've
mm.
had one of my clients, Ken Griffey Jr., asked him, we talk, I love baseball. We talked about the bat and said, it's like, hey, when you finally figured out the bat, did you ever continue to look, see what else is out there better? Nope. Once I got it, I got it. Didn't change anything.
So what
I heard
about that?
they changed the knob shape down the road later in his career, but it was like that was it, right? Like once we get it, we get it. So, but you have to wonder, hey, would he have seen the same success if we didn't ever figure out the right bat? And you can ask the same question for your putting. Hey, is somebody a poor putter because the stick's not helpful? And this is where my world is very different than the rest of the club fitting world. You do a driver fitting, somebody walks onto the range, they spin it at 3,800. The face is about a degree and a half open to the path, and the ball goes about 230 in the air, and it launches at 20 degrees. It's kind of slappy. It launches high. It's just not very good. But now all of a sudden, you don't change anything to that swing. That's not bad. Face is only a degree and a half open to the path. Path, I don't know, call it four left. It's a little cutty, but it's fine.
Yeah.
You can change the head, the shaft, the CG, the loft, take that same crummy swing and you can spin it at 2,600 and get the ball curving from right to left for the player. And they're the happiest camper in the world. And it didn't take any work. It was just you changing the club. Now get to the putting green. It doesn't work like that.
No, of course.
And so to those out there that are fitting putters, yes, absolutely. A better putter will help. Something that you aim straighter should help. Not everybody benefits from zero aim or straight aim, but a lot of players would. Does a putter that rotates more or less bending on your pattern helpful? Yeah, it could be, but there's so much more to it than that. Because now you talk about the speed component. Okay, well, there's a weight factor to putters. Is it too heavy or too light? And then that weight factor impacts my ability to manage my size and tempo.
So this is why your sessions are 3 hours.
There is why it's not just a quick fix. Could we make it a fix? Totally, but it doesn't do anybody any justice to jump in there and say, hey, yeah, just stand here, do this differently. Like we could fix it in 15 or 20 minutes and they could make better strokes. But then we're lacking in the skillfulness, and there are a couple of question marks as to whether or not there was any understanding, any ownership of that new information. Because the second that half hour lesson breaks down, there are no breadcrumbs to go back to.
This has been amazing. We'll wrap it up here in a minute. And you know what? We might even get you back on in 6 to 12 months and do like a full deep dive into certain putting strokes because I want to pick your brain. But what are just for the listener that's out there? What might be some of the signs that they do need to get a putter fitting and check that their putter is not hurting them rather than helping them?
Well, if you have a question about whether or not the putter's hurting or helping, it starts with the skillfulness. Hey, can I manage my speed well with it? And maybe it's a technique issue, maybe the putter's not helping the issue. I can tell you though, for a lot of players that are listening to this, if I tacked on 20 grams to your driver shaft and 20 grams to your driver head, you're probably not going to hit it as well as you currently do. just keep that in mind when you're looking at your putter and you've got a mallet and it's newer and it's heavier, and it's it's interesting to see what happens when you start changing things like total weight and swing weight for a player. So I will say keep that in mind. Then you can also very proactively kind of figure out the directional component, whether it be a gate or a template to create a gate. How often do I hit this putter straight and manage my speed well with it? That might be worth looking at here, but I wouldn't consecutively test 5 putters. Right? You can't hit 10 putts with 5 putters in a row. By the time you get to the fourth or fifth putter, I hope you have figured out how to point a face somewhere between the gate. Of course, the fifth one was better. I got 40. I got 40 reps in before that one, so
Yeah, it's
I hope
hard,
we
right?
figured it out by now.
Yeah. All right. Just before we wrap up here, I'm putting you on the spot.
Yep.
Lot of kids listen, a lot of parents, a lot of coaches. Let's just say someone's getting to the golf course and they've done their like I see at my golf course, right? We have a driving range. It's only small, but we have a range. We have a chipping green. We have a putting green, and 90% of the players will have a warm up putt. What should they be doing to maximize? Let's say they've got that 10 minutes before they tee off to warm up, which we all know is not enough, but most people in Australia at least are rushing to the golf course and getting to play. They got 10 minutes on the putting green. What are you prescribing, Dr. Combs?
The everyday items are so essential. Am I taking the time to gather information about what the course is giving me? Green speed? Am I set up well? Am I starting it online? Am I aware of what some of the reads might look like today? I think that's been a big piece for me as I've built out the putting plan, is making sure that we have an understanding of enough information to boil it down to 10 minutes. I've given up the battle of trying to say, well, you need to practice for a half hour before you go play. It's just not going to happen, stateside or Australia, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But if I can boil it down to in just 10 minutes, we can gather enough information to be functional. That certainly changes the game for people. It's the fact that there's opportunity, and because the process is efficient, because I'm using stacked protocols, all of a sudden now my doors are I have more flexibility, and the door opens up to be functional and be able to perform out there.
All right. You want to just give us that final plug on the website or how people can find you, and we'll also whack it in the show notes for everyone.
Perfect. That is at Preston's Putting on Instagram. That's where all the content is. If you'd like to download the free ebook, that is at prestonsputting.com. And when you download the ebook, it'll be that book called 3 Things to Know, and you'll get easy access to some of my other information, like a 3 Bullet Thursday comes out, a few notes every week that I definitely stole from Tim Ferriss's 5 Bullet Friday. I figured Friday's taken, so might as well send mine on Thursday. But a few notes about stuff that's happening in the putting world, things that I'm doing, the latest and greatest, whether that be new technology in the garage or the quote to ponder too. I did steal that from Tim. I kind of like it.
Yeah, that's awesome, mate. Thank you
Would
so
you
much
like,
for giving up some of your time, and we'll chat again soon.
definitely. Would you like to close it with my quote that I'm pondering for this
Go.
week's edition?
Let's do it.
All right, I stole this one from Adam Mastriani. He said, "It's the toothbrushing problem. You have to work at it forever until you die. You can't just do it really well once and let it ride forever. You can be mad about it, but it won't make your teeth any cleaner.
That's
You
amazing.
might have to do the everyday items really well for the rest of your life."
That's and you know what? It's one of the questions. Like I do ask a lot of people, what do you see um, in the best players in the world? And it's they do the little things that no one else wants to do. They do them really well. It's just part of their everyday routine.
Yeah, and it's just in stark contrast to the diploma problem of I worked at this really hard for 4 years, and once I'm done, I've got it.
Yeah,
And then I move on. And just putting and golf and as a whole is just such the antithesis of that, that it's the everyday items. And as long as I'm putting work in the right places every day, that's going to be the effectiveness that everybody needs in order to reach that higher level. But I don't think it has to be hard. Use the putting plan as that roadmap, that guidance to build the skills. And if you're building the skills well, then you can go from there. You can open those doors and start down that pathway.
amazing. Thank you, Preston.
Brent, thank you for having me. This was fun.
All right, take care.